The riots had gone on for days. What started in a small fishing village had spread throughout the entire country. Japan had become an empire showing its military might to the world, but the government was unpopular, fragile, and now the most basic of foods was unaffordable. You'd been to protests, you'd witnessed looting, and now you'd heard police stations and government offices were being bombed. Was the newfound empire of Japan losing its grip on the rule of law? The elites of Imperial Japan would attempt to balance empire with democratic government, and the consequences were enormous. From samurai uprisings to nationwide riots, from coup d'etat to political assassinations. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we examine the horrifying consequences of Imperial Japan's elite. The Japanese organized crime syndicates began as far back as 1612, merely as eccentric samurai with odd haircuts and clothing, always armed with katanas at their sides. Initially, these bands of highly loyal yet outlier samurai were known as kabukimono, crazy ones. In time, these figures would form organized groups and become renowned for illicit activities including blackmail, racketeering, smuggling, gambling, as well as controlling local enterprises through criminal means. They are most famed for their substantial body tattooing and the ritual of removing one's little finger as a symbol of loyalty to the cause. As the Meiji Restoration started in 1867 gave Japan arguably the greatest modernization seen on Earth, so did the Yakuza start to modernize. Their recruitment expanded, acquiring members from construction jobs and dock workers. Yet their gambling had to go underground as the police began a major crackdown. Politics during the Meiji Restoration is where the Yakuza found their most impact. Across the Meiji Restoration, ultra-nationalist groups would disrupt the entire country's turn towards democracy. Their actions would impact Japanese society through blackmail, coups, and even assassinations. And the Yakuza were the muscle. The highest-ranking social class in Imperial Japan was the imperial family itself, holding the ultimate power across its rule. Closest in ranking to the imperial family were the kuge, Japan's aristocracy, if you will. This class of nobles held many high positions in government and society and was closely tied to the imperial family. In service of this ruling class was the warrior caste of samurai, defenders and armed forces in Japan for many centuries. The samurai had sizable power and influence in the country. Outside of traditional elites, the integrated business conglomerates of Japan's economy were known as zaibatsu. Their influence meant control over much of Imperial Japan's economy and government, a point of controversy for many traditionalists in the country. Zaibatsu was likely in close contact with kazoku, the bureaucrats of Japan's government, typically highly educated officials holding positions in law and administration. The chintai were Imperial Japan's intellectuals, scholars, and academics, shaping the political thought and culture of the country. Finally, the guntai were the military elite, the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces' highest-ranking officers and leaders. Across the Meiji Restoration from the late 19th century, militarism and extreme sentiment rose, and the public would radically side with different factions, often resulting in bloodshed. The Meiji government brought a new era to Japan, and among its many incredible modernizations came many traditional elements being left behind. Most notably for Japan, the leaving behind of the samurai. In 1868, the samurai as a ruling force in the country was the norm. As the Meiji Restoration took hold, samurai looked to be left behind, with Japan seeking defense from an army made up of conscripts. Naturally, the samurai didn't believe peasant conscripts were up to the task, and didn't wish to give up their status as Japan's natural defenders. The Meiji government wanted to disarm the samurai, and the samurai didn't want to be disarmed. In 1877, just 9 years into the Meiji era, the samurai revolted for 8 long months against the government, taking place across the southwest of the country, namely around the Satsuma domain. The Imperial Japanese forces would take up arms against the samurai at the siege of Kumamoto Castle, the Battle of Tabaruzaka, and the Battle of Shiroyama. The Satsuma samurai were heavily supported by several anti-government factions, but by September 24, 1877, were defeated. In what was the last civil war fought in Japan, the costs of the elite's choices and the rebellion it occurred were significant. Over 30,000 were wounded or killed in the conflict, and the government paid through the nose for it. So profoundly expensive was crushing the Satsuma Samurai Rebellion, Japan needed monetary reforms so significant it would leave the gold standard and raise its national debt. As the Meiji Restoration's modernization of Japan unfolded, the country found itself in an unparalleled growth, but it was not without severe protest and discord. 1905 to 1918 in Japan was known as the era of popular violence, and much of this was brought from the fast-moving reforms of elites. The turn of the 20th century had seen Japan rise militarily and seemingly gain benefits. Military success against China in 1895, Russia in 1905, and the annexation of Korea saw a country turned great power. However, military gains didn't translate so well to the general public. Wartime inflation was rife, wages did not rise, and the price of commodities did. Most significantly, the staple of Japanese food, rice. The actual price of rice would double in a relatively short period, and soon, rioting followed. In the summer of 1918, protests and riots across Japan were like nothing the country had ever seen before. Across the year, there were over 400 disputes with some 66,000 workers. Amazingly, many of the rioters were not rural and barely making ends meet, but modern employed urbanites who'd simply had enough. What started with one protest in the fishing town of Uozo, Toyama Prefecture on July 23rd escalated wildly. Riots would follow across the summer. Strikes and looting became regular, and government and police officials were targets of bombings. Of the 60,000 or so involved, 25,000 would face arrest. 8,000 of those were sentenced, some facing the death penalty. So pronounced was the lack of civil order that Prime Minister Terauchi and his entire cabinet would resign in September of that year. Japan's instability following the rice riots was only opportunity for the Yakuza-backed and trained ultranationalist factions. Hara Takashi was installed as Prime Minister of Japan following Terauchi Masatake's resignation. In office from September 1918, Takashi was something of a moderate, easing Japan's policies on Korean annexation and joining the League of Nations and Paris Peace Conference. However, moderation does little in the eyes of ideologues. Liberals in the country found him far too cautious, and his stances were openly despised by the ultranationalists. 3 years into his premiership, ultranationalist violence would claim his life. On November 4, 1921, Prime Minister Hara was stabbed to death at Tokyo Station, waiting for a train to a Kyoto Party conference. His assassin, Nakaoka Konichi, was a right-winger of ultranationalist stance, convinced Hara was corrupt and, most profoundly, that he favored Zaibatsu influence in Japan's politics. Incredibly, despite murdering a country's premier, Nakaoka would have a death sentence resentenced to life imprisonment, of which he would only serve 13 years. Ultranationalists in Japan held the extreme belief that national reform was only possible through violent means. That meant bringing violence to two parties, in particular, any liberal politicians with pro-Western sentiment, and the Zaibatsu, the most powerful corporate interests in the country. The League of Blood incident in 1932 was a major instance of these sentiments coming to a head. Led by Nisho Inoue, a far-right radical Buddhist no less, 20 wealthy business figures and politicians were targets for assassination by the group. On February 9th, Junosuke was shot to death before a speech at an elementary school in Tokyo. Little than a month later, Takuma Dan was shot dead outside the Mitsui Bank in Kihonbashi, Tokyo. The group had targeted 20 individuals and only managed the slaying of 2. However, the assassins would be arrested, and the League of Blood was brought to public light. Despite their actions being reprehensible, many in Japan could agree with the sentiments of the conspirators despite disagreeing with their actions. Yet for ultranationalists, defending the interest of the emperor was everything. And with public sentiment making domestic terrorism harder to prosecute, this incident was one of many. The Meiji Restoration birthed the Empire of Japan, yet hand in hand sought to bring functioning democracy to the country. Unfortunately, on so many occasions, factions within the nation made violent stands against such action. None is more infamous than the May 15th incident. Following the signature of an interwar naval treaty, Japan's navy had been committed to limiting its size. Evidently, the burgeoning great power of Japan in the early 20th century had many people within it that didn't want to see the power hindered. Supported by the ultranationalist League of Blood, several Japanese Navy and Army cadets planned to overthrow the Japanese government. For many with ultranationalist sentiments, the May 15th incident was a chance to finish what the League of Blood incident had started. Astoundingly, this coup d'etat attempt included assassinating Charlie Chaplin to bring Japan into war with the United States. Luckily, this did not happen, as Chaplin was watching a sumo wrestling match with the Prime Minister's son during a tour of the country. While that likely saved both of their lives, Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi would not be so lucky. On May 15, 1932, the Prime Minister was shot dead at his residence by 11 naval cadets, many of which were just 19 years old. It's alleged Tsuyoshi's last words were, "If I could speak, you would listen." It's also alleged the killers responded, "Dialogue is useless." Despite the second Prime Minister being assassinated in just 10 years, once again, the killers were handed light sentences, in approval with public sentiment. The power of the formative democratic government was significantly eroded. The rule of law in the country suffered, and militarism only rose. Japan was only years away from its most militant peak, the Pacific theater of World War II, and it would take the threat of total annihilation to bring this to a halt. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.